What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Wednesday, August 18th of 2021. Thank you for tuning into the stream, whether you are watching me live here or watching this back as a recording or listening back as a recording or listening live, whatever you're doing. I know I'm hearing from a lot of people that you guys like watching and listening to the show in a lot of different ways. So however this is reaching you, thank you for being here today. If this is your first time watching our stream, this is a live Q&A style show where I answer questions from SaberSim users about how to use SaberSim, about DFS strategy, whatever you guys want to talk about. You guys drive the conversation. We do this live for a reason because I want follow-up questions and clarifying questions, and I want engagement from you guys. If you have your 2 cents to throw into the ring, I guess that's kind of a mixed metaphor there, 2 cents to throw into the ring. But anyway, getting distracting myself here. I want to hear from you guys, basically, long story short, right? So throw your comments into the YouTube chat. Throw them into the Office Hours channel in Slack. I want to hear from you guys. That's why we do this live. The best shows are where we've got a lot of engagement from everybody. I see Eric's here. Eric, what's going on? Welcome to the stream here today. Let's see. I've got one good question to dig in here to today. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about editing projections and the value of editing projections and when you should do that and things like that. But we'll have plenty of time to answer questions today. So if you guys have questions, want to get things into the queue, go ahead and do so now. So I know what's in front of me here. I know what is coming. I know how long to spend on some of the questions I've got based on how many are in the queue. But only other housekeeping item is we are planning on doing a redesign preview here later this week. I believe it's going to be tomorrow. I'm waiting for just some confirmation on that, but I've been mentioning a lot in these streams recently that we've got a big visual update coming your guys' way here before the start of football season. So I know that's coming up on us quick. We are doing kind of some of our final bug fixing of that, but it's a full visual update. It ships with a bunch of features here that I've been talking about for a while in office hours. So want to hop on, walk you guys through the new redesign, show you where a few things are, but also walk through a bunch of the cool new features and some of the new functionality we have there. So we're all really excited about that. Again, I think that is likely to be tomorrow's office hour stream will be a redesign preview. So look forward to that. But I see Paris just asked a question. What's up, man? We'll go ahead and get to your question here shortly in a bit. I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into it. I'm going to start with the one question I had that came in before the show. This is from Josh. Don't know if Josh is here watching live. Josh, if you're here, give me a shout. But let's go ahead and get this question in. It's a good one, and you'll see I'm on the NFL side of the app here because we have kind of an NFL question, not necessarily NFL, but the question was asked from the standpoint of NFL. So we'll start there. But Josh said, I wanted to know how much I should trust the default projections for NFL. It looks like this came through a little weird when I copied it, but the original message said, I know some like Max and Danny have said that people probably should change them to their own likings, but I also know some of the most profitable DFS players using SaberSim do not change them very much at all. This is a great question, right? So actually, I'm going to go ahead and recopy this because this looks weird. It's hard to read. Okay, so I'm gonna spend some time on this. I'm gonna talk about this kind of from the ground up and really everything we might need to know here. So I will say this in part starts to get into the idea of kind of your individual style of play. Right. We had a video recently. It's up on as a strategy session on a YouTube channel that's called like the five strategies of winning DFS players or something like that. And the whole point of that video was to kind of talk about that you can have an effective process when you're playing DFS that maybe you incorporate a variety of different things or you focus your efforts in one area. So Josh mentioned here that Max and Danny do a lot of editing projections. I know both those guys do. That's a big part of their process. And that's not so much in the vein of just trying to dial in projections and maybe fix issues where the model might not be taking something into account, which we can talk about that in a moment. But they also get a lot of their leverage and find their edge on the field by editing projections. So, for example, again, we're a few weeks out from the week one still here. So these projections are kind of just baselines. I wouldn't like put anything heavily into this, but perhaps those guys felt that maybe the Eagles Falcons game was going underlooked by the field and was an opportunity to find a little bit of edge on the field from an ownership standpoint. I know that maybe an approach might be to bump up the team totals, maybe make that more of an even game, maybe make that start to look like something resembling a shootout, and bump up the projections there. And it's important to note that this maybe isn't something where you feel like the model isn't taking into account the Eagles' chance of having a big game, but you feel like the field is underestimating the chance of the Eagles having a good game. So you're bumping up the projections to get more of those teams in your lineups. And that's perfectly fine, right? And we mentioned that earlier on stream, actually, in a different office hours video, that one of the ways, and one of the ways that you can think about editing projections is not so much through the lens of trying to be hyper accurate and trying to say, I'm going to match the teams to exactly what I think their median outcome exactly is going to be, but instead to find leverage and to use it as an opportunity to bump up the teams that you just simply want to get more of in your lineups, and to bump down the teams that you want to get less of in your lineups because of the other research that you've done. And I think that's probably the most important way to edit projections if you're going to make this a part of your process, and probably the most long-term effective ways, right? If we wanted to just completely average everything out and find the most accurate average projections, right, you would probably end up mostly putting each team closer to like Vegas, maybe, especially on a sport like football, where the Vegas lines, the closing lines are going to be very sharp, but that's not really actually going to get you any edge on the field. That's not really going to give you much of an advantage. So I think that's a good way to frame it. I would say you saw me just adjust the team projections here from the team. I also would recommend, if you are just getting started with editing projections or trying to figure out where you can best spend your time, I would focus a lot of your efforts here on the teams. The reason why is that when we adjust a team projection up or down, let's go ahead and do a couple of these. We're actually going to go ahead and slightly tweak the game sims and the player projections we have for those players to match the new image that the builder has of that game, right? If the Texans points go down, that's going to have negative impacts to varying levels on a variety of different players on their team. That's going to boost up looks like actually a couple Jaguars players, right? Even Trevor Lawrence's projection slightly goes up, but also the Jaguars defense. And the same deal with Indiana. If we boost them up, their points are going to go up. Let's see what it does to Seattle. It has an interesting impact on Seattle, right? It actually also boosts up the projections of other Seattle quarterbacks and pass catchers, but it boosts down a player like the starting running back, Chris Carson's projection, right? These effects can be a little bit complicated, and I think it's a little bit more natural to adjust team projections first rather than focusing on player projections. So I think that's another good point. I will say there is sometimes some opportunity to make adjustments to projections if you think that there is something that the model isn't taking into account, and you've got a strong reason to believe that. One of those things that I think could be a likely signal, and we talk about this a lot on the baseball side, is keeping an eye on Vegas. Vegas closing lines, especially in a massive market like NFL, are pretty sharp. I don't think it makes sense to go adjust all of our team totals to match Vegas because, again, all you're going to do is get yourself very close to the field. What the field's going to do, you're going to make your lineups a lot more chalky. But if there is a team that we are very different on, maybe we've got a much higher or much lower team total than Vegas does, and in particular, if the Vegas line has moved over the course of the week away from us, that is often a very common signal that there might be something we're not considering about that game that the model's not picking up. That may be a good opportunity to match that team total to Vegas, or maybe to meet halfway. For example, I think a team that we are actually high on right now, I was just going to look. Okay, maybe this has changed. Let's see if there's a team that maybe we could see. Okay, so Pittsburgh might be a one that's interesting, right? If we're getting, again, this is the sports betting side of the app, but I wouldn't go and act on any of this stuff just yet. But it looks like maybe we might be a little bit high on the Steelers if we have a 2-unit bet on the spread in their favor. We're looking like that game's going to be pretty close, about a field goal deciding that game. It wouldn't surprise me if Vegas thinks that the Bills are a heavier favorite in that game. If you were also seeing that, for example, maybe the line for or the implied team total for Pittsburgh was going down over the course of the week, and we were already higher on them than we should be, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe we're too low on Buffalo. I don't know what it is. It might make sense then to make an adjustment down for the Steelers or something like that if you think that there's a signal in your research that we are missing something about that game. I do think those situations are probably somewhat rare compared to I feel like the percentage of times that maybe somebody is making edits to projections to find leverage and to find an edge on the field based on thinking about like ownership or things like that are more common than a time where the model's not taking something into account, right? Our NFL model, just like our other sport models, the team has been rigorously working hard on making sure that is ready for the start of the season. There is some awesome work going on behind the scenes right now to make sure that the sims are very dialed in. We actually plan on having a strategy session to have the data guys like Matt and Will come in here and talk about some of the work that they've been doing on the model here before the start of the season or just at the start of the season. We did one of those videos for baseball. It was a pretty big success. People seem to like that video a lot, so we want to do another one of those for football. But again, the model is going to be taking into account more than you might think. And I think even if you're going and hunting for advanced stats and things like that and trying to find something that our model's not taking into account, you're probably just going to end up double counting without realizing it. So I feel like a few points in summary here. Editing projections is best done, I think, at least as a starting point, using the team totals, because I think it's a little bit more of an intuitive approach. There's nothing wrong with if you feel like maybe we're a couple points too high on a specific player, knocking them down just a tad or something like that, right? But I think it's a more intuitive approach when you're looking at the slate on the whole to adjust team projections rather than it is to adjust player projections, because you get to enjoy the effects of the right players going up or down accordingly based on editing, based on the team totals you've adjusted. Second, I don't think there's anything wrong, and I think it can actually be a really strong approach to, while still maintaining a little bit of a gentle hand with it, to use this more as an opportunity to figure out how you want to find your edge on the field and how you want to find your leverage against the ownership when you're editing projections, right? I don't think the question necessarily always needs to be, well, do I think that the Eagles are going to score 23 points? It can be more, I think the field is undervaluing the ceiling outcomes of this team, so I'm going to bump them up to get more of them in my lineups, right? And if you're not sure how much to bump them up, there's nothing wrong with giving it a try, applying the changes and running a test build and seeing what impact that had on your builds, right? And then third, you can use your research, other NFL content, but also things like Vegas to see if there is a situation where the model maybe really isn't taking something into account. Maybe we are over or under on a certain team. There are signals saying that we might be missing something there, and you can make some adjustments from there. I guess, again, kind of the final full circle point here is that this isn't something that you have to do. I don't actually spend very much time editing projections in my process. I've mentioned here before, my process is really heavily focused running my research builds to determine upside with high smart diversity builds, and then doing a lot of my work in the exposures rather than really heavily editing projections. But that's just because that's what makes sense to me. That's the way I like to think about it. There's not really a wrong or a right way. If you are a beginner, if you are very new to SaberSim or new to DFS or both, I think this is probably not where I would start with finding where you want to add your personal touch to your process. I think, again, the model is it's a robust model for all of our sports, and I think you can offer a ton of value to the program by working within the bounds of your test build and playing in general with what the builder kind of wants to do and leaving your mark in the exposures, right? I like to always think about that. If you just run a test build, don't make any changes to projections, and then do a lot of your work in the exposures page, you're essentially playing in kind of a playground of lineups that the builder thinks are viable. And either way, you kind of know that you're still in line with, you're still working with a set of lineups that SaberSim like to begin with, right? And I just kind of like knowing that. It gives me a little bit of comfort knowing that I'm not going too far out of bounds, even if I'm taking pretty aggressive stands with chalk and things like that. So kind of fairly long answer to that question. Again, Josh, don't know if you had the chance to catch this live. Give me a shout if you did. If you didn't, totally fine. I'll get you a time-stamped recording. If you have any more questions, definitely feel free to ask. We'll be talking a bunch more about football over the course of the next few weeks. And again, I think it's totally fine to play around and start messing around with some of these builds, but we are still working on getting this all dialed in. I noticed the other day, just for example, that we don't have a Josh Allen projection yet. Like there are little things like that around. So we'll continue to get the football projections all dialed in, but it's exciting to be talking about some of this stuff. So on that front, we're all starting to put together what the kind of football kickoff content schedule is going to look like for us. We want to hit you guys hard with a bunch of awesome football content right for the start of the season. So stay tuned. I'll have more information on that shortly about what that's going to look like. But we want to do maybe some showdown content for the opening night showdown game. We obviously kind of want to do like an NFL kickoff stream where we're just answering a lot of questions about football, talking about what maybe the process should look like for football, various strategy sessions here and there. So it's going to be exciting, but we'll get to that here soon. So I see a few other folks have rolled up. Jim, Kay Schwarzy, James are all here. Welcome, guys. We got a decent crew here watching us now. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. I see I've got a couple other questions, so I'll go ahead and get rolling and keep going here. Paris asked a question. He said, I seem to be possessed with finding the highest projected score. Is that smart? I think I have felt possessed by DFS in different ways quite a bit throughout my career as well. I would say I don't think hunting for the highest projected score is necessarily the best approach. Hunting for the highest projected score is actually what a traditional optimizer is just going to do right out of the gate. The problem with that is that the lineups that win your GPP contests are not the ones are not lineups optimized for average performance, right? They're lineups that are optimized for ceiling. So what is nice about SaberSim is that by simulating every game thousands of times play by play, we can get an idea of what the real ranges of outcomes of players are. We also know what the correlations between certain players are, and we can quantify it. And then our sliders allow us to build lineups right out of the gate that have the right amount of stacking, the right amount of correlation. They're well leveraged against the field, and they have upside in the form of smart diversity and are optimized for that ceiling score. So that is part of the reason that by default, when you run a build with SaberSim, the lineups are not, in fact, sorted by projected score. They are sorted by SaberScore, which is kind of a metric that explains or defines how correlated, how leveraged, and how high upside the lineup is, right? And these are the kinds of lineups that we actually want to build for GPPs. That being said, we do offer a option that you can rank your lineups by projected score instead. And that's totally fine. I think you're going to find that in general, that actually doesn't have a massive impact on your exposures. It slightly changes your lineup, shuffles things around a bit, maybe gives you a higher average outcome or average or min cash equity comparatively. But I definitely don't think hunting for the highest projected score is the smartest approach, because those aren't the lineups that end up winning these contests, right? The highest projected score lineup is going to be the best point per dollar plays at every position generally. It's not going to have correlated stacks, or it's not going to have stacks. It's not going to have correlation. It will probably be playing very chalky plays. It will be playing what the kind of consensus best plays in the slate are. So I wouldn't take that approach. That being said, if you are already similarly to what sorting by projected score does, right? If you have a DFS process that is leading you to maybe making some contrarian decisions, fading chalk in certain spots, you are building lineups with stacks. Maybe you're using the correlation slider, or you're using the stacking rule to force correlation into your lineups. You're using a high-ish smart diversity slider so that you know that you're getting upside in your lineups already. And then by either sorting by projected score up here, or by maybe, I don't know, some other part of your process that is like, I know I've heard from some users before, especially in like sports like NBA, where average projections are actually very good and kind of predictive of ceiling outcomes. I know there's some users out there that have mentioned to me before that they will like eliminate lineups below a certain projected score point either in the app or in like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. Those kinds of things are fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with using projected score as like a final guardrail to decide what lineups you're actually going to end up playing. But in general, I would say your GPP DFS process should not be about hunting for the highest projected score lineup, right? We want lineups that are correlated. We want lineups that are well leveraged from an ownership standpoint against the field, and we want lineups that are high upside. But of course, for cash games, real quick before we move on, the lineup you want is exactly the lineup that maximizes projected score. And that is why our cash sliders turn all these things off. If we just build a couple cash lineups real quick, we'll see looks quite a bit different than the GPP lineups because we are optimizing for average score. We're optimizing for projected score in this particular case. But if you are interested, it can always be interesting. One thing I like to do is run a cash build on just default settings and get an idea of kind of what the optimal is. So you can see these don't use any stacks, but the optimal is at 117-ish with our projections at the moment for the main slate tonight. So it can be sometimes kind of useful to see what the top lineups look like in your GPP build. And we'll sort this back by Saber score so that we can see. And you can see, for example, we're giving up 17 points, or actually we're giving up about 15 points of projected score here for the opportunity to fade some chalk, to play some lower owned stacks, right? To stack heavily, to play 4-4 a very correlated lineup, right? So, I mean, I guess put another way, we're sacrificing really very little from my perspective in the terms of even our median projection to have this lineup that has upside, that's correlated, that can win a GPP. So that's a better way, I think, to think about it. But definitely a good question. Okay, cool. So James had a question here. I noticed that most successful people in MLB take a stand even in multi-entry on at least one pitcher. Can you explain if I'm correct with that observation? And they roster that one in each lineup, maybe mix in another one or two with that single pitcher. For example, Alcantara last night, I should have taken a stand on him. Yeah, be careful with this kind of stuff. Hindsight is tough, right? I think, again, these one slate samples, it can just be a little tricky to be like, well, I should have done this last night, and I'm going to now incorporate that into my process. What's right for one slate is not always right for the other. But this is an interesting observation. I would say that this maybe isn't something that everyone does, or the most successful people do every single time, right? I assume based on the way you've kind of phrased this here, James, it sounds like you're saying like locking in at least one pitcher. I don't think by any means you necessarily have to do that. I think there are opportunities where that makes sense. I think if there is a particularly high ceiling pitcher or something like that, someone on a slate, especially a really big slate, where if you feel like the field is going to, I guess the situation that would lead me to doing something like that, or intentionally doing something like that, would be if I felt like there was far and away one pitcher on the slate that was by far the best pitching option. I'm thinking about slates like maybe the DeGrom slates from earlier this season, where I think the field is going to roster that guy 50 to 60% of the time. And I think he's optimal 80, 90% of the time. I might lock that pitcher in just because I think even at the highest projected owned pitcher on the slate, I still don't think the field is adequately assessing that player's upside, and I might just hit the lock button or something like that. But I wouldn't say that this is necessarily something that, for me personally, again, I can only speak for me, I don't do this with intention very often. There are times where I'm 100% on a pitcher, but it's not something I'm necessarily just saying I'm all in on this guy, unless I'm kind of just led there dynamically, right, by SaberSim, and maybe my exposures are kind of taking me in that direction. But yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I think I don't know. It also depends on kind of the slate context and what that player's ownership is, and what the rest of your lineups around that guy look like, and also your risk tolerance, right? You're all in on that guy. So if he fails, all of your lineups are failing. But James said, I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression. No, I don't think you are. It's a good question. And if you've done some more research on this than I have, it sounds like maybe you probably have. But if there's a particular player that you're kind of tailing, I think that can be an interesting research opportunity, is to kind of maybe it's Giant Squid or I don't know, somebody else from the SaberSim community, but maybe you're kind of following a player and seeing what their lineups look like on different slates and what their exposures look like and things like that. That can be, I think, a pretty useful tool to I don't know, learn maybe some rules of thumb that are leaking into that player's process. But you just want to be a little bit careful with that, because it's not always immediately apparent as to why that player did that, or also what their process looked like, right? Again, 100% exposure to one particular pitcher on the slate might mean that they hit the lock button on that guy, thought it was a leverage opportunity. For whatever reason, it could also mean that they were kind of dynamically led to 100% exposure to that player just throughout their process. It wasn't so much of an intentional, I'm all in on this guy. Same thing with fades, right? You could see that a certain player shows up in 0% of somebody's lineups. That could be a very intentional stand. That also could be maybe just kind of the way it worked out. I think that you'll find that from the sharpest players, again, depending on the contest, but thinking about these big 150 max GPPs, if there are a handful of chalky players in one form or the other showing up in the lineup, right? Baseball in particular, I like to break things out kind of as the pitchers, the stack, the big stack, and the minor stack. And I think especially on the really top-heavy big 150 maxes that you see are like the featured contests every night, I see a lot of the sharp players are making a leverage play or differentiating at least one of those spots. Either the pitchers are kind of unique or chalky, or the minor stack or the major stack, or maybe even two, right? So if you're kind of digging into exposures and trying to figure out why a certain player is doing something, it may be that they are all in on a certain low-owned pitcher or something like that, because the chalky stacks from that player's perspective are the best plays of the night. The only way to get the exposure that player may want in 150 lineups to chalky, highly projected stacks is to be very aggressive with a stand on a certain pitcher or something like that. So, but cool. Good question, though. And I mean, if you've been researching this and digging into this, I'd be interested to see what you found. So, but another question here from Clement. He said, hello, how can I cap off positions with my ownership? For example, I want all my QB to be 20% owned. How would I do that? So at the moment, and again, at the moment, this is something that is going to change slightly in the redesign. We're planning on making this much easier. The moment you are unfortunately, we don't have ownership yet. I'll do this for baseball. You're unfortunately going to be limited to handling this somewhat manually. So let's say that you wanted to, let's say for pitchers that you, for whatever reason, didn't want to play anyone over 20% owned at pitcher, you can just uncheck these guys and just remove them from your pool before you build. You could also, of course, do this in the post-build process by simply just kind of looking at that player's ownership and removing them from the pool here. So part of the reason, I've mentioned this before, we build 500 lineups when you ask for 20 is so that you can dynamically edit your exposures in the post-build process without having to build additional lineups. So if you don't want these guys that are going to be 20% plus owned, it is very easy to just set max exposures of 0 and remove them here in the post-build process. So all we are doing then is searching through the pool of 500 lineups to find our favorite 20 by Saber score that match your exposures. So that is the easiest way to do that. There is a nifty new feature coming in the redesign, again, hoping to be able to show this off to you guys tomorrow, that allows you to kind of do some dynamic filtering before your build process. So we have a new system set up that you can make a rule that says something like exclude all players or something. I don't know exactly. I'll have to look what it looks like for football, but I know, for example, with baseball, you can say like exclude all pitchers with projected owned over 20%. And it will just do it, and it'll remove them all from your pool at once. So that filter does a lot more than that, but should be pretty cool. Again, hoping to be able to show that off to you guys tomorrow. I will let you know as soon as I know about that. But that is the easiest way to do that for now, Clement. And I would say, I guess, actually, last note on this, I would say if you know, like, if you have rules like this that you are dead set on, that you know that you're just simply not going to roster a certain player over a certain projected ownership at a given position, I would do that before your build, because then we're going to build you a set of lineups that just much better matches what you're looking for to begin with. So if you don't want, I know you said QBs here, but whatever, we don't have the NFL the ownership yet. So for baseball, if you don't want pitchers over 20% projected owned or something like that, I would do that before you start your build, so that the lineups look the way you want them to. But another great question there. So, all right, guys, what else do you have for me? Those are all of my questions I have in my queue or have been asked so far. Anything else you guys want to talk about? Any other questions or thoughts or ideas or anything? We've had quite a week already of office hours. I know we've had some pretty long shows here on Monday and Tuesday with a bunch of questions. So seems to be a little bit of a theme here that I'm starting to see as we go week by week, where especially Monday and Tuesday, super busy. Everyone's coming out of the weekend, had plenty of time to think about DFS a little bit, ask a bunch of questions. And then Wednesday, Thursday, depending on if we have a strategy session that week, sometimes slows down a little bit. And then Friday, heading into the weekend, I think there's always a bunch of questions that come in. But that is all good. No problem there. Any other questions for me here before we maybe start to think about wrapping up for the day? Really awesome stuff today. We talked a little bit about editing projections, particularly from thinking about NFL, but I think that conversation extends to every sport, all different sports, at least, especially where they have team projections to edit. We talked a little bit about thinking about projected score and why we're not necessarily optimizing our lineups for projected score. We talked a little bit about some of these ideas of like taking stands and thinking about pitching ownership, and also like tailing pro players and kind of seeing what those players do night after night with their lineups. Talked a little bit about capping his ownership just now. So good question there from Clement. Jim said, I can't wait for NFL. Yeah, me either. It is coming soon. This is the best time of the year. I think it's something special about that week 1 Sunday morning. Is pretty magical. So I'm pretty excited about that. But guys, I'll go ahead and leave it there. I don't see any other questions coming in right now. So again, as soon as I have confirmation that we are doing our redesign preview tomorrow or could be Friday, but really hoping to do that this week, I will let you guys know in the Office Hours channel on Slack. I will be back here tomorrow in some capacity, one way or the other, at 2 p.m. Eastern, either hosting Office Hours or doing that redesign preview for you guys. So tune into that. Enjoy the slate tonight. Good luck in the rest of the early slate going on now. I hope you don't have too much Tyler Mahle exposure, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Take care.